And today, like I said, I have John Bass over here. He and I are going to be talking about, once again, the fundamentals of Warcraft, as in the building blocks, the light and the void, and the balance between those two forces, as well as all the other forces that make up the Warcraft universe, and how they relate to each other. It's funny, it's cool because John very specifically wanted to bring up this topic. He was kind of thinking long and hard about what is it that he wants to talk about in today's stream. So we're going to be talking for about an hour and some change about what this is, but I'm going to let him, I want to let him kind of lead things off, because this is a pretty broad topic. The beginning of everything, the origins of the universe, and like, you know, we're getting into very theoretical stuff. So this is all for fun. You know, we're just going to explore just what these building blocks are, what they mean, and well, hi John. I'll just kind of leave things to you if I still have you connected.
What's going on, man?
Hey, buddy. I'm glad that we actually stayed connected. I wasn't even looking. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna talk blankly. I hope that he hears me.
I sure do. How's it going, chat? How's everybody doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, man.
First of all, the very first thing that I wanted to bring to attention is to congratulate you, Soul, on your Keystone Master achievement.
Yeah, so yeah, so the quick story on that, folks, is that here, let me get off transmit for a bit. The quick story on that is I had done an early raid last night. I was like, okay, we're gonna make this quick. Let's have a quick night. And then after the raid, I was like, okay, maybe we can do a 15 now. And some people were like, ooh. Meanwhile, John was like, oh my God, take me. I'll go. I'll like tank you for you. Just stand there and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, dude, I really want to do it with the guild. So we did a quarter stars 15. We made it on time. So I finally got my Keystone Master achievement, which I'm reasonably proud of. You know, I got it yesterday, so I finally did it. It can be put to bed now. The meme is over, and all that. But yeah, John was very encouraging about me getting in. So thank you for the encouragement, John.
Always, dude. I mean, I understand why some people don't really like Keystones. After being a raid leader since Blackwing Lair, though, I found myself kind of burnt out of raiding. Keystones have been a nice comfort for me at this point.
I mean, they are fun. It is a fun thing to do. I guess the thing for my guild is that raiding is still a more premier thing that we do when it comes to group content. Because right after we're done with the raid, half of us split off. Half of us ended up doing the 15, and the other half was like, "Oh, we're gonna get onto Overwatch and do our own thing and whatever." I'm like, "All right, cool." So that really was it. And I think even now there are a number of people that are interested in Keystones, but they're only interested enough to maybe like get like the weekly chest or otherwise just to get like the minimum amount of gear that we need in order to progress. Like for the most part, we're not too interested in like topping meters or doing mythics and all that stuff.
I found myself really interested in trying to push my Raider IO. I mean, I loved doing Keystones as it was, but just to have another score to kind of bring myself up on. I mean, granted, on a realm like Illidan, it's kind of difficult to find yourself anywhere in the top 100 whatsoever.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't even think about Raider IO and just the need to, I gotta up my score so that way I can get into like those better runs, which totally makes sense. When it comes to higher level Keystones, that's the game that you play. Even though some people might disagree with it or be like, oh, that's so stupid and blah, blah, blah. It's pretty much the accepted thing. And so even someone like me, I'm just going to have to like deal with it, even if it's something that I don't necessarily support. I don't really buy into the idea of add-ons speaking for me. To me, it's kind of like almost an anti-community sort of thing, because people will look at your score just like how they'll look at gear score or your achievements or things like that before anything else. So having this player-made thing, this player-made system, okay, cool. That's something that players have naturally created in order to suit their needs. It's just not something that I'm very fond of as someone who sees the conversations going on in WoW, who talk about, oh well, whatever happened to getting onto trade chat and just talking with people and getting groups together and yada yada yada. So it's this clash of ideologies between people who claim to be who claim to call for both things, a return to community as well as having an add-on like Raider.io to use.
Now I don't know how many people in chat have I've been playing WoW for a long time. I was around during the gear score days and all that fun stuff. The end of Wrath of the Lich King wasn't necessarily a fun time because of that. But Raider.io, when it comes down to higher level Mythic Plus, I mean, I don't understand why people are doing stuff like requiring 2.5K to do a 15. Like, that's stupid. I'll give you that. But once you get yourself into like 22s, 23s, and you get up toward my IO score like a 3.9 to 4K, it becomes absolutely pivotal to be able to see what the people who are applying for your group have done, what they're able to do. You can even get extensions on it. You can see how many times they died in the dungeon and stuff along those lines. I mean, it becomes really necessary because of how strict the timer gets with how difficult the content is already. You need everybody to be able to perform at their absolute maximum. Raider.io, in my opinion, has been one of the best player created add-ons that have ever hit this game, only because it has helped me in so many ways to be able to put together really good groups. Now, I'll also tell you on the community aspect of it, I've never, even back like in vanilla and BC dungeons, like in BC heroics even, I very seldomly talked to people as much in Discord and in-game chat as I ever have until I got into higher in Mythic Plus like I'm in right now. Because, I mean, the coordination level is so absolutely intense and has to be so precise that communication's everything. If you don't have that communication, the group's going to fall apart instantly.
So tell me, since you're on top of the whole Mythic Plus game, how do you see communities fitting into the mix? Because I had spoke about it a number of times and had my own bit of speculation as to how communities are going to play in the Battle for Azeroth. Because at least right now, you can create your own BattleNet groups, so that way you can have some sort of cross-realm sort of group creation. That way you can create your own sort of room where it could be like, okay, these are all the people that are like, all about 15 pluses, 20 pluses or so. Is that a thing, or is it just not a thing and you rely exclusively on the group finder for it?
I think the community tool is going to be really helpful. I know really well the group finder is going to be still the center point as to finding immediate groups and stuff like that, especially if you're trying to push your weekly key and you just want to get it done and over with, because then you have the same disconnect with you have the same potential disconnect with communities as you could with a guild. You could be wanting to do your keystone when there isn't very many other people online, or there's not an ideal group comp for the level of keystone you're wanting to push. So I know that the group finder's still going to be helpful, but my keystone pushing group, we decided ourselves that we were going to start a community to do really high level pushing at the beginning of Battle for Azeroth, just to see how it plays out, to do a little bit of experimentation ourselves to see how it expands.
So my question though is that because there already is a form of this in the form of the BattleNet groups, so do you use that now, or does that not seem very useful? Because at least the way that I see it, it's not too different from it really isn't too different from what communities are going to be, except for the fact that you need to be logged into game on that particular toon already. Whereas with the BattleNet groups, you don't have to necessarily be logged into that toon or be on the same faction or even be in the same game. As long as you're in some game in the BattleNet environment, you'll be able to communicate with each other and otherwise tell someone, hey, get on. I want to do some keys or something like that. Oh, I'm just curious, like, if you guys aren't using that, why do you think that is?
We are using it, and BattleNet themselves, it's been fantastic the way that we're able to keep in touch with each other in that sense. Because, I mean, either way, most of us are at least on mobile. So, like, if one of us get on, there's like 9 people that I'll message immediately and just say keys. and I'll get at least 4 responses almost every time with people jumping right onto their main to join me for some. It makes it pretty quick and easy. You don't even really need the group finder. The only reason the group finder and Raider.io are truthfully necessary is for pugs. You even did a video on Preach Gaming and his opinion on Raider.io and the pug system, how stuff seems like it could be really overly easy sometimes to some, but to others it's really difficult. That's why Raider.io becomes really necessary to pugging really high level Mythic Plus. Because I mean, if you take somebody with no IO that has like a 975 to a 979 item level, they could have they could have the experience of like someone who does their weekly 15 for that dungeon, not somebody who does a weekly 25 for that dungeon. Could make a really, really devastating blow into their ability to properly mitigate specific group wipe mechanics and stuff like that. Could have a serious effect on their timing for diminishing returns on AoE stuns, things along those lines. You just need to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing without a shadow of a doubt before you put yourself in a group situation like that. Because it's the same thing with Mythic rating. When you get put into a situation that you should be able to do and you know you can do, it's kind of frustrating when you, for a really stupid reason, can't get it done because you brought somebody along that said they could do it, but they couldn't. Whereas Raider.io gives you a way to kind of weed those people out, at least when it comes to high-level keys. Because if I want to do a 22 Court of Stars, the people that I want in there, if I have to pug people, or I want a minimum experience of a 19 done in the timer so that they know how difficult the mechanics are going to be given specific fixes.
Yeah, so my hopes are pretty high for the community's tool overall. The thing that makes me worry a little bit, this is also with regards to the relationship with Raider.io, is that people will use it very impersonally. The community's tool, as well as the BattleNet groups, it's a way to take groups to that next level beyond just, hey, join this pug really quick, and then once we're done, I'm never going to see you again. It just feels like the players, that many players, not all of course, but there are many players that just take advantage of the ease of grouping in twofold, in two ways. One, it's easy to find people, so it makes the need to build relationships with those same people like a little bit less. It doesn't feel like as big of a priority. And at the same time, I can leave groups whenever I feel like, knowing that it will be relatively easy for me to find a group again, as opposed to way in the past when I had nothing but trade chat, or I had no one except for the people in my realm. So I'm looking forward to communities. I want to see it work. I'd love to have my own that's more for like casual play, low, just for, maybe I could like do keys and stuff, but more than anything, I just want to have a place for like people to hang out, and for those who want to do higher level play like Mythic rating, high level keystones, I hope that players do use these tools to not just make it easy to build groups, but also make it easy to start building relationships, and a lasting relationship beyond just that particular run.
Now, I would agree with you 100% on a casual level, like at least where we're standing in Legion, because that's kind of the marker point that my brain uses for what harder level keys are. Anything below like 17, 18, it doesn't seem like there's very much community to it. At this point in Legion, it seems like, just charge through, get it done. But I've personally made some of my closest in-game friends by just joining their group in like Group Finder. We did really, really, really good together. The group had great synergy just out of like our first time communicating. And in fact, one of my co-GM, his character's name's Deadheady. My co-GM, I met him through a Group Finder tool during Tuma Sargeras tier. We got a 15 done and 2-chested it easy. And I was like, hey, we should start doing keys together. And then like all 9 other of the people that I run with and have now eventually transferred over to my server and joined my guild to run with me, I've all met through that Group Finder tool. Again, I understand completely at a casual level because you don't need that much communication at that level, but it's hard to find people that you have that kind of synergy with,
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, so like I said, I have high hopes for it. Raid.io is a great tool for weeding people out and otherwise being a filter to prevent you from having, that initial bad experience. And again, the hope and expectation is that communities will help build that sort of relationship, or at least have a place for easy communication, because I think that's something that's always needed to, to help build your own small community. There's so many people that preach the idea of, oh, server community, blah 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 blah, but at least my experience was never really that way, because I saw server community as more ambiance than an actual experience, because that's just the kind of person I am. I'm not some social butterfly that's like, that hops into that walks into Dalaran and types /2, hi everybody, it's me, Soul, come say hi to me, because whatever. And I don't expect people to be like, oh hi, let's have some cordial and casual conversation that's not political or controversial at all, or meme like. So yeah, the idea of communities and being able to curate like the people that I want to hang out with, I feel is a lot more valuable than the whole hope and prayer for like this big server community and where everyone gets along, because that just doesn't feel like the reality of things.
I couldn't agree with you anymore on that. I mean, just the simple likelihood of actually getting that kind of conversation on the internet, it seems pretty unlikely in itself. I mean, of course, you're going to find those couple people occasionally, and those end up being the people that you get along with and you play WoW with all the time. But I don't know how the server community thing is going to go, at least on servers like mine. Again, I play on Illidan on Horde. I have since Burning Crusade. It can get pretty toxic on a server like this sometimes.
Yeah, over here on Bleeding Hollow, I have no relationship with people that are outside of the guild except for rival vendors for the market that I work, and like that's it. I just talk with them every now and then, talk about pricing, and that's really it. I really could care less about the other folks on here that participate in gameplay that I myself don't participate in. So higher end PvP, mythic raiding, and so on and so forth. Like I don't look at trade chat for actual discussion.
I don't look at trade chat for actual discussion either. I don't think it's been looked at that way for quite a long time. I mean, it's pretty much just a troll fest at this point. I found myself, at least with guildies, that not necessarily have become unsatisfied with the content that I push with my guild, but so that they don't feel like they need to like leave and go somewhere else. There's so many high-level progressive guilds on my server that I've found myself talking to and getting along with a couple of the officers of some of these guilds, and them allowing some of my higher level guildies that are ready for mythic raiding and starting to push, mythic and Taurus, allowing them to be brought along for this guild's events and being included in their loot council dealios and getting the same point system that everybody else is getting, but still being a part of my guild. I found a lot of really good response and feedback out of that. And I feel like something like a server community tool could even help push along a situation like that, or help other people find themselves in a situation similar.
So let's switch gears to the thing that we were on, that we originally came on here for. I was really happy to talk about this whole community thing, because I just wanted to kind of sort of vent about it, because I haven't talked about it in a minute, in a hot minute or two. But let's get to what brought you to think about these fundamentals, this whole the whole light and void deal. Because the last time we had talked, we touched on a little bit of that and how it touched in with morality, but it looks like now we're going beyond, well beyond that, and getting into just what it is that creates this universe this whole Warcraft universe that we live in.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure most of the people in chat are relatively in tune with lore of this game. Might have read Chronicle. Chronicle does a really good job of giving a short, sweet, and to the point explanation of the origins of the Great Dark Beyond. With light, of course, being in the beginning, those pockets that were left empty is what manifested into the void. From that, we had a clash of those two primal forces, which then created the other forces of life, death, chaos, and order. We had there. Then they give you the primal chart of the universe in that book, which I think is really, really interesting. I love the way that they put them all. It looks like they're holding each other together almost. It looks like it's if one piece were to fall out or one were to get bigger than the other, that it would throw everything out of whack. And I think that's kind of the idea. There's a whole bunch of evidence in game that I've seen of this, specifically being like with the Burning Legion, you know, what happened on in our timelines, Draenor, which then turned into the Outland when the Burning Legion gained too much throw in that land. It got ripped asunder. It got ripped apart by the fabric of time and space itself. Then we have an alternate universe Draenor after the Void and after the Legion were purged from that planet and they were no longer an issue. Then the Light was able to start pursuing its final goal because it didn't have its primal opposite to focus on. It didn't have anything else to focus on to try to defeat so that it could pursue its goal. Which then in turn, of course, like I said in even one of my previous videos, that is what pushed the Light to be able to start causing people like Yrel to do her rather inquisitory like things.
I didn't lose you, did I?
No, did you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. Okay. It seemed like you cut off for a second. So when it comes to these different power sets, the light and shadow and all that stuff, I agree with you for the most part. It feels like how our universe works, you know, the real world universe, how everything has a sort of balance. There are certain laws that kind of took shape as soon as, you know, this is all theoretical stuff, but, you know, after creation or the Big Bang or whatever you want to call it, there are certain systems like physics and temperature and all that stuff that have a careful balance. And I think some of that just happened to be because of, well, there's all sorts of volatility, or, you know, in the early stages of the universe, as well as the Great Dark Beyond. And once the dust settled, we came to see this sort of balance between life and death and like the arcane and the fell and that sort of stuff. At the center of it all, or at least I'd say surrounding all of it, is these super fundamental building blocks, the light and the void. Because without that, none of the other stuff exists. So there's always the way I see it, there's always a touch of influence of both the light and the void that touches everything else, whether it's like the Burning Legion or the Wild Gods or the Shadowlands and all that stuff. There are certain elements of light and shadow that permeate like everything.
I mean, exactly. That is the exact point that I was just about to get at. What really inspired me to look at it in this direction was I was in applied physics last semester, and I learned in a little bit more depth about what absolute zero is and what its exact opposite is. Absolute zero, of course, being without any presence of heat. Like there's zero presence of heat. There's no colder in all of existence in the known universe. But then without a presence of cold, you have a quasar. That is the hottest anomaly that exists in all of the universe as far as we are aware. But right in between, you have the warm sunlight that you sit underneath on the beach. If one were to overtake the other, if we didn't have the balance of a cool breeze on a hot summer day, then what happens? You get really hot, you get really uncomfortable. If it gets too cold and there's no sun to cover it, what do you get? You get snow, ice, sleet, all that kind of fun stuff. Even biometric pressure plays into this mix a whole lot with the way that it changes balances of weather. With you get pressure systems like funnel clouds and all that kind of fun stuff. When something becomes out of whack, it causes chaos and devastation, even in our version of physics. So with the way that it's shown the same chaos and devastation when one of these primal forces of existence and nature overtake, we're left with the same outcome: chaos and devastation. Which I wanted to talk to you, since you've had beta access, about how you feel with the way that now the Burning Legion has no more presence whatsoever on Azeroth, the way that the Light and Void are poking their heads out very heavily in their presence to battle for Azeroth. Specifically with the tentacle thing, and it's somewhere in Kul Tiras. I can't even remember exactly where it is.
Stormsong Valley, sir.
Yeah.
It's this is I'm gonna rant for a bit on this one. So the way that I feel about like balance and like the non-presence of like the Burning Legion and I guess the idea of Fel and all that, I think of this goes into something that we briefly talked about, where I feel strongly that the Great Dark Beyond is a bubble. Think of it like an air bubble that exists in between this whole maelstrom of energy, this whole clash between the light and the void. And the Great Dark Beyond is just everything that happens when these forces collide. So you could almost think of like the wider part of the universe as like, you know, this whole collection of light and void, and all over the place you're seeing these reactions and explosions. So I believe that there are in fact multiple Great Dark Beyonds. They're not linked. They just happen to all exist in this same giant, super giant, cosmically giant space. And then everything that happens within these little air bubbles is everything that happens. And in this case, we're living in one air bubble, which is called the Great Dark Beyond, which still pisses me off because it's like, okay, why are we describing like this thing? Why don't we just call it the universe instead of two adverbs and a noun? But whatever. The idea of
fallacy, man.
Whatever. The idea of the Fel not being as present, that doesn't mean a whole lot to me, because at least the way that I see it, balance within the Great Dark Beyond will always figure itself out. And we see little bits of evidence in this. Like, for example, in Draenor, yeah, I guess this applies to both AU and I guess this applies to the main universe, Draenor. There is an overabundance of the life element, and there are things that happen there. You know, I'll make it a long story short. There's a lot of drama that happens in Draenor because there is an abundance of life elements on that planet. The Titans came in, they cleaned stuff up, and cool, that was it. So that was kind of the universe's natural way, or at least this universe's natural way of cleaning shit up, of making things right. You know, the Titans are effectively the custodians of the Great Dark Beyond, and unfortunately, you know, we lose a lot of that. So there is a sense of imbalance that can occur there, because, you know, we have this big driving force, the Titans, that are no longer really an influence on it. But I think that when it comes to the whole cosmic timeline, it's going to balance itself out some way, somehow. You know, because at the same time, you know, we don't deal with Titans anymore, at least at the moment. But we're also not really dealing with the Burning Legion either. So I think that there's always going to be some sort of balance in the end. The only time where we're not going to see this sort of balance is when we're dealing with these very fundamental forces, the light and the void. And that's why I've kind of convinced myself that there's an end game for both sides, that the void wants to consume all the energy in the Great Dark and return everything to darkness. I'm also convinced that the light wants to preserve everything and kind of crystallize everything and engulf everything in light as well. So the end game for for both the light and the shadow is to effectively pop the bubble. It's just a matter of what's the bubble going to be filled with, light or void. So that's how lately I've been seeing the whole end game working.
All right, guys, everybody in chat, do me a favor and put on your tinfoil hats here, okay?
Yeah. This is all woo, kind of like wild speculation
out here too. Pyromancer made a video, I don't even know how long ago.
You know, I gotta say really quick that it appears, I'm just saying, it seems like there's a lot of folks that participate in my channel that don't seem to like him very much because of his his theories. But oh well, go ahead.
I'm partially disagreeing with his theory. This is where I'm bringing it up. The dude said, and this actually kind of plays off to the theory that you just stated with the whole popping of a bubble and it depending on whether or not it's filled with light or void. He said specifically that it seems maybe Sargeras was kind of destined to become the Chaos Titan, that what happened was meant to happen, that it was going to happen either way because they needed to have a primal representation of chaos itself, the same way that Argus needed to be the Death Titan. They needed to have an Unmaker. It's probably because this ordering has happened before, and maybe in the end, the same, because I mean, the Void does make prophetic like suggestions. It may not be correct each time because every suggestion's different, but they all seem to end the same way. All life will be consumed by the void in the end. So maybe after all life is consumed by the void and by darkness, light will then spawn out of that darkness and then recreate the entire situation over again in span.
So it's like saying if the bubble pops, another bubble will pop out somewhere else.
Exactly.
That's something that I buy into because I see the whole light and void thing as perpetual. It's not going to end. It's always going to happen. It's just that's at a cosmic level that we as citizens of the great dark beyond are never going to really stomach or understand or even care about because that's at a cosmic level. Because note that or keep in mind that in the first Chronicles book, the interactions with the Titans, we see them say, oh yeah, Sargeras did this, he went to a planet, he cleaved it in two, then he immediately went back to the Titans and did stuff, but there's no measure of time there. I think we talked about this before, but there's no measure of time there. And so we don't know how long it takes, but we do know that for the time it takes Sargeras to reach Azeroth, he was like, screw that, I need to find a shortcut because time is of the essence, in his mind at least. So it at least tells me that all this, the universe itself moves incredibly slowly. Like the whole idea of like the bubble popping and all that stuff, it's not like it's going to happen instantly. But at the same time, the idea of balance plays in. There's, all around this great sea of light and void, and I'm glancing at chat, and I don't see it as a multiverse theory. I just see it as this is a totally different universe. They're not related. There's no, okay, in this universe there's like a different thrall or whatever. Like the whole idea of realities, it's hard for me to, it's not something that I can understand well enough to speak to it. So I have to not talk about the idea of different timelines and multiverse theory and all that stuff because it's beyond me. So I'm not going to touch it. That's why my theory goes towards more so the idea of, this great wide expanse with multiple pieces of space. So, elsewhere there might be another kind of great dark beyond that is our reality. Us humans and all that stuff, and somewhere else it's like a different kind of reality altogether. But all that stuff is separate.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily see how there would be a particular like multiverse theory going on within all this. That would just be kind of a really funky mix of like real life theoretic physics and in-game theoretic physics. That would be very strange. I mean, current multiverse theory stands is that there's endless, infinite amounts of exact copies of our universe existing in the exact same place at the exact same time. They're just vibrating on different frequencies, and that's why you can't see it.
Yeah, so rather than try to explain it away, I'm just going to admit that it's beyond me. So yeah, I'm not going to dive in. I'm not going to dive into that mess because then we're going to be contradicting ourselves like all morning, and I don't want to do that.
I'm with you on that. What do you think about the light and void influences that are taking in place to the Alliance?
Oh, how they have both the Lightforged peoples and the Void Elf peoples and all that stuff?
Yes, sir.
I find it interesting that I find it well on multiple levels. I find this kind of interesting because one, you have High King Rin who's accepting both of these kinds of fundamental, these forces that represent fundamental differences. But it's also important to keep in mind that we as players are omniscient by comparison. There are a lot of things that the Horde and the Alliance or otherwise the citizens of Azeroth like don't know or aren't knowledgeable about. So like the idea of the Titans and that sort of thing. The average citizen doesn't really know much of squat about any of that stuff. So it's a little bit unfair to judge Anduin based on, hey, why do you have these people that are conflicting with each other hanging out? As far as he knows, he's like, okay, well, Turalyon and Alaria, these are war heroes. These are celebrated heroes from the First and Second War. And so, yeah, of course, we're going to have them hang out together without quite realizing what might be at stake later on. I don't think there's, there's no prophet telling them, hey, this is a bad idea because, light and void, they can't clash and all this bad stuff is going to happen. The people of Azeroth don't quite realize what they're getting into quite yet. That's mostly how I see it.
I see the people of Azeroth as being completely blind to the largest villain in Warcraft history.
Hogger.
Bob.
Nomi. Or a fusion definitely. A fusion of all three of them. Oh my god.
Bob, Nomi, and Hogger all together. Oh my lord. They'd burn our food, make us laugh in the most dry-humored sense of anything, and then go Rah! All at the same time.
Who is the biggest villain?
Definitely Nomi. No, in all seriousness, I'm pretty sure the all-time biggest villain to the Warcraft universe is gonna have to be the. I'm not gonna necessarily say it's the old gods themselves, like individually, but it's like what they do, what they represent. Because I'm kind of on board with the meme-ish theory that the old gods are more of a manifestation of death instead of void. Because, I mean, what they do is corrupt and decay flesh. They don't, like, decimate it into oblivion, right?
So tell me a little bit more about that theory, that the old gods, they represent death and not the void?
Okay, exactly. I think the old gods are more of a representation of death. I mean, I get that it's been stated many times that in-game statements, especially from this era, shouldn't be necessarily heftily intaken into lore. But why would Yogg-Saron specifically say during your encounter with him that he's the god of death if he didn't have some kind of tie into death? They caused the curse of flesh. The curse of flesh specifically making them corruptible to old god whispers. Not necessarily saying that the old gods and the void don't work like side by side. They don't work for a parallel goal, being the end goal of consuming all life, because that's the point of death in the first place, isn't it? I mean, all life will be consumed by death in the end. That's the entire circle of nature. That's the way it works. So when the old gods controlled Azeroth, when the Black Empire was like at its peak, the entire earth was, I mean, like all of Azeroth was covered in this like decayed, vile flesh. It wasn't consumed by void. I mean, Neoloth is described as the city of the dead, the city where there's only sleep, where mad things walk and something. I don't remember the exact way that they described Neolotha, but it's definitely wild.
So, let's run with this for a little bit. So, if the old gods are more closely aligned with death as opposed to the void, there are two things to maybe I'm touching on too broad of a topic right now, but two things to touch on is what would their end game be with regard to, what would be the old gods' end game be, and how does that tie into the, this isn't a popular thing that I like very much, the whole thing about the whispers getting into Alaria's head about, oh, Sylvanas is the true enemy, but then if Sylvanas is the true enemy, but Sylvanas serves death and the old gods serve death, then shouldn't they be brofists?
I think that it's Sylvanas serving undeath versus serving death itself, because the old gods seek to consume life, but Sylvanas seeks to recreate, like to reanimate life.
Fair enough. Cool. I guess where I find some conflict there is I just think about Chronicles and how, the Void just poops out old gods. And so that kind of tells me, yes, there is a definite relationship between the old gods and the Void because the Void poops them out. So there's there's that. But I'm still running with this. Let's see.
I have a little bit of a theory if you're up to hear it.
I would love to hear it. That gives me time to think.
I feel like the Void and the old gods, they may be separate manifestations. Like let's just assume that the old gods are on par with death, and like Void Naru would then in that term be like, or Void Lords, however you would want to look at it, would then be the representation of the Void. They could potentially work coinciding, like in all of their goals, the same way that like the primal force of life and the primal force of arcane work together, or light and arcane work together in their ways. That they have the exact same end game, they have the exact same goal, but using different fronts to achieve it together.
That's what actually makes me think the opposite, though. It's like okay, the old gods, they utilize all sorts of different tools that are kind of unique to them, mostly with having to do with whispers and insanity and other such things. But they're also working with the rule sets that are provided to them within the Great Dark Beyond. So it's like, are the old gods not allowed to use fell magic? Are they not allowed to tell the Twilight cultists, no, you can't use arcane spells because that's not what we do. You have to use these sorts of things. It's kind of the same thing on why do warlocks they use different sorts of things. They use fire magic, they use shadow bolt, which is like a void kind of thing. They use Chaos Bolt, which is a fell-based thing. They summon Void Walkers, which come from the Void and all that sort of thing. So I think that there is a definite leaning when it comes to different forces using different powers. But I think that as long as you're able to practice something like that, it's like, the way I say it, it's like, well, shit, why not? The idea of old gods associating with themselves closely with death, I guess the one thing that I would be really looking out for would be, can the old gods do anything in the Shadowlands?
The old gods, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that Chronicle said that that's how the Emerald Nightmare was created in the first place, was that Yogg-Saron was able to, because Vordrasil grew too deep within Northrend and ended up touching Yogg-Saron, he was able to then infect the tree and get himself into the Shadowlands, which allowed him to infect the Emerald Nightmare on the other side of it.
Chat, can you help me out on that one? I don't, my knowledge of the Emerald Nightmare is not great. So
the Emerald Nightmare is crazy. It's such that, to me, that is one of the most difficult to understand topics that this game has had to throw at us, because it's like another dimension almost.
Yeah, but at the same time, the Emerald Dream is a Titan creation. So that's where we're jumping around different power sets. It's like, okay, the Titans created the Titan Keepers. They created Freya. Freya in turn is the one who created the Emerald Dream. The Emerald Dream, parts of it were usurped by the old gods and infected with their little void thingamajiggers. It just feels like when it comes to void and death and that side of things, that they're related. They're not one and the same, but they are at least related power sets that that they play nice with each other. Just like how on kind of the other end, forces of good, they rely more on life, nature, the light, arcane, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, really good perspective, actually. Like, so what you're saying is like one side of the coin being any of like chaos, death, void, whichever. It seems to use like any side of that spectrum, but then things that are more aspected to what we would perceive as good are focused into life, light, and the light, in arcane and the like, right?
It leans toward that, yeah. So like the void, the old gods, they have very specific power sets, but then as you go down if you go down the pyramid, you see that like the Twilight cultists and like their minions and whatnot, they utilize different kinds of power sets that are closely related. They use like shadow related stuff, but they also practice other things too that are closely related to them. I think that's where you get. I guess that kind of makes me jump to the idea of the light, which to me is a very fickle power set because the light refuses people. If you either don't believe, to me, it feels like you need to really be a believer in the light in order to utilize its power. But when it comes to the void, you need to kind of have flipped your shit in order to utilize, in order to get closer to the void and otherwise be able to use shadow-based magic. That's kind of how it feels.
I mean, pretty much, yeah. Especially when you look at the way that, like, it seems that necromantic magic and shadow magic are basically the exact same thing, but they're not.
I mean, I think from there we just kind of get to the limitations. I don't like breaking away like this, but I think that's where we get to the limitations of Blizzard's writing. That when it comes to like this whole power set, the different orders and all that stuff, this is something that they had to put together. This isn't like the foundation that the Warcraft universe is built on. They put this foundation together after the fact and started to build around it. So I think there is some cooking to be done when it comes to really settling and explaining these. And I think that Blizzard has done an okay job, but it's been a little bit haphazard because we see different statements that people rely on. We rely on not just the Chronicle, but we rely on blue posts, on Q&As and interviews that help put together what this universe is made out of. And sometimes those things conflict. So that's why I love Chronicle books, because they help to get everything down on paper. Hi, everybody. Hi, Mike.
I gotta say, I couldn't imagine being in like a Blizzard story writer's position in any fashion. Like, with the way that this game was created in the first place, with the ideology that they created it with, of a massive immersive world with a crazy, super awesome backstory, and people just kept wanting more and more and more, and they're so many years deep now. Like, they have to perform with the story at this point. They don't really have a choice. Like, that, there's a reason that they gave us answers to like the entire universe's origins in itself. It gave us answers to the primal balances within it. Like, the way they're retconning all of these characters throughout these books and giving them entire new stories, and even getting rid of some Madan.
He never existed.
I mean, we find ourselves limited entirely to them recreating all these people's stories to bend around all the changes they've made. And we're going to see a lot of changes at that. So it's strange the way that some people mix Chronicle lore with old lore, because it's so popularly considered non-canon, a lot of that old lore at this point.
So is it,
because they're rewriting all of it.
yeah, so it makes it hard. I don't want to. Well, I don't want to admit that they're rewriting all of it. I mean, they're bolstering it, and that's why we have the Chronicle to kind of settle things. There are changes that were made. Some small, some big, some of them really big, but I think that when it came to this whole power set, life, disorder, fell, undeath, yada yada yada, that they did it that they're doing it right. It's just a matter of clearing up certain things, like what can people like when it comes to people on Azeroth. It's like, dude, we can like practice anything. We have disc priests for Christ's sake. Like we can practice all sorts of things and align ourselves in different ways. This makes me think of how you were talking about. Okay, well, the Alliance has both the light and the void. On the flip side of that, the Horde does seem to employ more nature based stuff. Do they not? Like when it comes to, I mean, sure they when it comes to class balance and all that, that's one thing. But at least when it comes to their leadership, they tend to lean more towards nature based stuff. For example, with the orcs and their shamanism, the Tauren and the druids, I'm trying to think of the one race that I'm missing that I really shouldn't be missing. But their races tend to lean more towards like nature based stuff. I guess the trolls is who I'm talking about.
The trolls interest me in a really specific way, because I've read some speculation that voodoo magic itself is like a completely separate bit of magic. Voodoo magic, of course, being the one that allows them to draw from the Shadowlands and speak with the Lowa, draw power from the Shadowlands as well. I'm wondering what spectrum that form of magic would be on, because it hasn't been touched on too much by Blizzard, aside mentioning that it's not necessarily shadow magic, because it's not.
The idea of the Lowa, that fascinates me a lot, because like you said, it's not necessarily shadow magic. You're relying but the way I see it, that's more of a, I think they're aligned more closely with nature and the wild gods, but there are elements of the Lowa that play with all sorts of stuff. Like Von Samdi, he messes around in the Shadowlands quite frequently, and we don't quite know what he does. He's he's like the closest thing that I've seen to a master of the Shadowlands, even though he's not. He's kind of like that custodian. He just kind of hangs around and messes around with souls, and apparently he gets stronger with the more souls that he uses, but we don't quite understand it. And when it comes to Lowa themselves, it is kind of weird that the power of the Lowa is based on worship. Like so many old style gods in human history have been on, like they rely on the idea of the more worshippers that they have, the more powerful that the Lowa themselves become. Even though they are mortal, you can kill them, you can strike them down, and we see that we've seen that throughout Warcraft's history.
It seems like all the Lowa's power is derived from sacrifice, at least some of the specific examples that we've seen, like Hakar. Of course, him being a blood god, as they called him, he derived his power from blood sacrifices directly to him. But he's definitely, I don't know necessarily that he was mortal, because once he was, his like physical existence in Azeroth was mortal, but like his essence continued to live on within the Shadowlands, and that's why we saw like their attempt to bring Hakar back during Cataclysm.
Well, that's why I see the Shadowlands as I'm looking at the whole thing with the power sets right now, and they have the Emerald Dream opposite of the Shadowlands, and I think that is kind of an imbalance, because the way I see the Shadowlands is basically the other side of the universe. It's just like it's the universe, but everything's dead instead of alive, and just like everything else, I think that the Shadowlands is simply a product. Just another product of this whole explosion of light and shadow, kind of like the Twisting Nether, how that is its own like separate weird place where all sorts of crazy stuff happens. But the Shadowlands is just one more spot that it seems like anyone can go to if they have the necessary tools or the powers or the ingredients even. All you got to do is drink something apparently, and then ta-da, you can go into the Shadowlands. I mean, you're dead, but you can basically go and you can come back.
I don't know that the Emerald Dream, if there were to be an exact opposite of the Shadow, I mean, not even exactly an opposite of the Shadowlands, but if there were to be like a kind of contrasting force to the Shadowlands, I feel like the Twisting Nether may be a bit more of a likely candidate of that position.
You think so? Because the way I see it, the opposite of the Shadowlands is when you're alive, and everything that you see there.
So then you should have it. So then the way that you see it, the alignment chart should be like reality, and then like life, and then the Shadowlands are reality and the Shadowlands, something along those lines.
Something like that. I mean, like when it comes to this power chart, we're looking mostly at Azeroth. So I see reality as, okay, that's Azeroth. The Emerald Dream is the PTR of Azeroth, and the Shadowlands is just like the upside down where everything's dead. I'm seeing it as simply as that. I think going beyond that, going to like different worlds and whatnot, it doesn't quite apply very well, because not every world has its own Titan Keeper that created their own Emerald Dream to curate and mess around with. But that also reminds me that when Freya created the Emerald Dream, she also took like, her favorite animals and all that stuff and empowered them. So you can kind of think of the Lowa as like the sons and daughters or whatever of all these different wild gods that Freya empowered and or bore. And so someone like Bwonsamdi might have been derived somehow, some way down the line. He might have been derived from something like that.
I think that's a really good point. Last time we streamed, I was just thinking about this when you brought this up. We had a little bit of a back and forth about like, the creator of the Emerald Dream versus who created the Shadowlands, because the Chronicle says that they don't know who created the Shadowlands. I think they might have written that in on purpose, as I was just thinking about it, as like when Sargeras ran away from the Titan Pantheon to like create his Burning Legion after they denied him and told him and turned him away. When he went to go create his Burning Legion and begin his crusade, I'm pretty sure the first thing that he did was stop off at Argus and start talking to the Eredar lords to discuss their options that he was going to give them. At that point, I'm pretty sure Sargeras knew that there was a slumbering world soul within Argus, and may have even known like what their purpose was. The reason that they may not have that, because Norgannon was noted in Chronicle, it was specified that he was the one who wrote, the events of Chronicle, that the Pantheon didn't know, because they didn't even know that Argus had been awakened. They didn't know how long he had been awakened and been going through his torture. For all we know, by the time the Titans discovered Azeroth, I mean, again, this could just be surpassing Blizzard's writing limitations. This is just some speculation. But maybe by the time that Freya and Eonar created the Emerald Dream, that Argus in turn created the Shadowlands, because there needed to be a contrast of that one, at least so to make more sense of Blizzard's ideology of what the opposite to the Emerald Dream should be.
I think that I think you're right that there are limitations in the writing so far, but I think that is also limited to when the Shadowlands was created, because I do recall Chronicles saying that it was made like hella early on. This is before they even mentioned the Titans.
You may be right.
So under that, and because of that, like if there was no Shadowlands before that, then the Eredar civilization as it was probably wouldn't exist the same way. But it depends, because the Eredar, they're pretty into the manipulations of souls. They do things with them. It's like, what do they do with souls when like what happens to souls when people die? Do they just float around? Do they go nowhere? Do they go into the Shadowlands and other such things? So it I guess it just kind of depends, but it feels like by default when you die you go into the Shadowlands and like that's pretty much it. It's just that the Eridar were like, hey, you know what, we can do more stuff with this because we're so good with magic stuff, we're hot shit, that we can create engines made of souls, and we can take these souls and put them into constructs so they can live for 25,000 years and they can guard our shit, even though all of us are dead now or something like that.
It's interesting the way that they painted how the Draenei handled death. I mean, Auchindoun is basically built out of the crystallized souls of their ancestors. So is the Exodar. I'm pretty sure that the Vindicar is as well.
And that's basically all. And that's just the cultural thing. We can throw ethics into it and be like, oh my god, how could you do that to the souls of to the souls of your ancestors and yada yada yada? Because I mean, to me, that's kind of the antithesis of how the Night Elves feel about life and spirits. Like, okay, maybe it's the same way because the Night Elves are like, no, let's make a big death wall to protect ourselves from our enemies, or let's use it to blow up demons and all that stuff. But those are extreme acts. But it's clear that in many cultures in Warcraft, death isn't the end, and spirits, you know, some of them are revered, like humans revere spirits greatly, but some cultures, they just use them as fuel.
Huh. The Night Elves, that's a pretty interesting outlook on the Night Elves. It almost seems like a cultural thing to them. Like, yeah, they have. I mean, they do have a really high respect for the Wisps. That's even mentioned throughout. I don't know if you played a Night Elf pre-Cata, but there was a small quest chain that explained to you about what the Wisps are and what they're doing there. During said quest chain, I mean, they're very. It states that they're very highly revered. They have a lot of respect for them as they are their past ancestors who decide to stick around. Those wisps, I guess they see when, like, those wisps were used, for example, to take down Archimonde. Those ancestors, they saw it as giving those ancestors one last chance to defend the living that they had left.
I guess, like, I mean, going back a little bit to the idea of the Lowa and trolls and stuff, it's all cultural. It's just, you know, these are the accepted things that these societies have done for, you know, years and years and generations. So for them, it's like, oh, ritual sacrifice, that's just our thing. That's what we do. Why you gotta look down on this, humans? You know, this is how we decided to live. And the Lowa probably feel the same way, because the Lowa at one point, they may have been regular mortal creatures that somehow got elevated to this status. I'm not quite sure how, but they did. But eventually they became part of that culture where they're worshipped and there are sacrifices that are made for them, and somehow they get stronger from that. It's a lot of interesting stuff that we still have yet to fully explore, because there's only so much chronicle that Blizzard can handle making, I suppose.
Man, I was just glancing over chat, and Atish said maybe Vol'jin made Sylvanas war chief so she could bring him back to life, but she missed the point.
Womp womp.
Oh, that's golden, man.
Oh, Sylvanas.
What kind of trouble that could have saved?
He could have just not been stabbed either, you know, lead from the back and not from the front for a change, but no. Could have put on some armor.
What I'm really, really wondering is, like, especially if Bwonsamdi was the one who instructed Vol'jin to make Sylvanas war chief. Bwonsamdi's getting weaker, which even has been stated. If Bwonsamdi's getting weaker due to the lack of feed of souls that he's getting, why would he want the Queen of Undeath to be the war chief?
Maybe because she's just, it could be a lot of things, or it could be a number of things. I mean, there could be like some grand conspiracy that Bwonsamdi is manipulating Sylvanas to be the war chief so that she can kill a whole people, and that he can feed off of the souls of the dead. which is contradictory because she might raise those souls, or she might raise those to be forsaken, and that would contradict it. I don't know, really, when it comes to what Vol'jin decided to do. Maybe he was just like super high, or he was like on drugs, or he was like dying, and some voice in his head just told him that had nothing to do with spirit. So it was like, oh, I was just thinking that at the time. Yeah, sure, Sylvanas, just have her do it. But I don't know. I really, it's hard to speculate something like that, like which Lowa was talking to Vol'jin. I'm not sure.
Man, I've been thinking about that so heavily ever since it was ever since the beginning of Legion, when it was stated that Vol'jin was told by the spirits to make her war chief. Like, it would make you wonder which one was he listening to, because it's stated very clearly previously that Bwansamdi was the one that Vol'jin had the strongest relationship with. I mean, I would assume that was the one that he was talking to, but there's no truly telling.
Well, for all we know, the spirits were telling him, hey, you know what? Lorthamar only has one eye. He kind of sucks. Bane's a goof. And who the hell in their right mind would make Gallywix war chief? So sorry, dude. All you got Sylvanas. So have fun with that. So it could have been just been something like that. They, a bunch of Lowa got together and be like, oh, so what do you think, guys, girls? Who do you think's gonna be good? Oh, okay, I vote for this one. Well, I vote for this one. Oh, that one kind of sucks. How about Sylvanas? Oh, you know what? Yeah, she's all right. She did a pretty good job at Broken Shore. All right, Sylvanas. They all voted, and then Vol'jin's like, all right, you guys, thanks for the advice, bros, ladies.
Who the hell in their right mind would make Gallywix war chief?
Well, hey, imagine that. It's like, oh, you won't understand. Yeah, many of you won't understand why I chose this, but Gallywix will be the war chief. He'll be like, what the fuck? Nope.
I mean, Gallywix would take that opportunity in a heartbeat. Think of all the money.
Fucking Gallywix. No thanks. Yeah, that would be that I would say would be like jumping the shark if Gallywix became the freaking war chief. But watch. A couple of years, I'm gonna go back to this stream and replay myself saying Gallywix, yeah, whatever. And then all of a sudden I'm like a total Gallywix fanboy. Oh yeah, he's the best war chief, man. He's progressive.
Yeah, dude, I was just thinking about that. Like, after the events of Battle for Azeroth, Sylvanas is taken down, or like we have a situation like with Garrosh. Well, who's going to be next in line? They pick Gallywix, dude. I'm going to have to make a video going back to this stream, recording you and I both making fun of that as a possibility.
I would just imagine, like either Sylvanas is deposed, or she just leaves her post, and she's like, all right, someone else is going to be war chief. And then you see who's there. There's Thalrisra, there's Gallywix, Bane, freaking dude, I'm forgetting.
Saurfang.
Lorthamar, Saurfang. It's like, all right, who's next? And then all of them except for Gallywix, they all take a step back, and Gallywix is like, wait, what? Hello, no,
no, don't do this.
I didn't want this. But yeah, as for why Vol'jin chose Sylvanas, it could have been straight up a low influence, or maybe they just reminded him, like, hey, when stuff hit the fan, Sylvanas is the one who did what she needed to do in order to keep the Horde alive, and so she did. She sounded the retreat, because otherwise they would have been wiped out. Because there was no tank out there taking care of freaking spaceship beams and all that. They were getting trucked. So she made the right call. Whereas everyone else was either too busy fighting, or they were hurt, or they were stabbed. So she was the one who Blizzard decided to have step up in that moment. So that probably lent some influence too. It just sounded like not a bad call to make. The problem is, of course, part of leading an organization is to also lead with heart, which is what Sylvanas does not have. But the question then is, when it comes to fighting the Burning Legion itself, is what's more necessary, having a heart or just having someone who's willing to take command and do what needs to be done in order to win?
But that's where so many people saw Saurfang as being a really, really good potential war chief, because like not only is he a really sound warrior, but he has a lot of moral stance. He's got a moral opinion to say. I mean, if you look at his Wowpedia page, it says on the page that he'll do what's necessary for the Horde and for his people, but he has limits, and that he'll do anything that it takes to stop a warmongering leader.
Well, remember, that's a wiki page that could be edited by me for all we know. So what did that cite? I'm curious. I don't have that page up.
Hang on, let me pull it up and I'll tell you.
God, someone made him sound freaking righteous, unless that's an actual citation from like something. I'm like, that sounds hokey almost. But you do make it. That is a good point. It's like, why was Saurfang not chosen? Is he? Does he fall short? Does Vol'jin feel like he leads with too much heart? That his sense of honor is detrimental to his leadership of the Horde? I mean, he's a terrific leader for the orcs. I don't think there's any question of that. But when it comes to leading a full-on organization, that's where I might start to question it. I don't know.
I think he might lead it with a little bit too much heart. And where it's cited from is during the events of the Siege of Orgrimmar, where he turned his back on Garrosh because he thought that he was doing too much damage, that he was doing a lot more damage than he could have been good. So that he would do whatever it would take to stop the warmongering spirit.
Yeah, but he was there. He was also at his side, up until the end. And this time, Saurfang's like, no, I've with regards to Sylvanas, it's like, oh, I had enough of this. I'm not gonna take this. I'm gonna go.
And I think that is exactly why he bitched out, because he scared scared himself with what happened with Garrosh, that he stuck around too long when he saw a lot of destruction happening around him.
Yeah, but that also makes me feel like he's acting very uncharacteristic of what he's supposed to be standing for, like honor and all that stuff, because he leaves. That still doesn't settle with me. I mean, I've had back and forth conversations with tons of people in comments and forum threads and other such things about why does Saurfang leave and not just stay and try to change things from within, because the argument that was consistently presented to me was something along the lines of, well, Saurfang wants to be a part of something that he can stand for. He doesn't stand for what Sylvanas is doing, so he leaves. But to me, that doesn't feel very strategic at all, considering his position as pretty much the orc racial leader. Like, he could have had influence over what decisions Sylvanas makes, because he would just say, no, I don't support this, and neither will the orcs, and you really should do things that make the orcs happy. Because if you just try to rule with an iron fist, you're gonna end up being like he could have and should have just warned her, hey, you don't want to be another Garrosh, do you? Because you're being another Garrosh, and if you go this route, things are not going to end well for you. And I think Sylvanas is smart enough to play the political game, because she does respect and kind of fear of, maybe not fear. I don't know if that's the right word, but she does respect Saurfang to a point, but he wastes it by not letting himself be rescued, or otherwise not returning to the Horde after, in the beginning of the battle for Azeroth.
I mean, to me, that just makes him kind of treasonous. I understand that he had a moral indifference with what his war chief was doing, but with the political power that he has, the sway that he has over most of the Horde, I'm sure that he could have said something. He could have tried something before just walking away. He abandoned the entirety of his people to be under her leadership. And I mean, he did. It's not even like he suggested, oh, hey, let's start another rebellion. He's like, nah, fuck you guys. I'm walking away entirely. I'm done with all of you.
So Zombie's calling me out from, again, this is another one of the conversations that I had with some folks saying that there is a confusion between honor and loyalty, that his sense of honor, basically I had the opinion that loyalty and honor are like the same thing, how that's part of how part of being honorable is being loyal to your commander, and how being loyal to your commander, part of that is considered honorable. And I think that's I think it's true that there, maybe I did confuse things a little bit, but then from what I had said earlier, this has nothing to do with honor and loyalty. This is politics, and this is a power struggle, and Saurfang decided to toss it. He decided to waste his opportunity to help out his people and have that political clout by not being there. Not being there means a little bit. It means that you are sending a statement to Sylvanas that obviously I'm not going to serve this kind of regime under her. But at the same time, you're not doing anything either. You're relinquishing control over what you can do, and that is, in my opinion, super weak. I think that's super weak sauce of him. He could have stepped up. He could have done what Vol'jin did, and started started a revolution from within, instead of waiting to get damn near assassinated before starting his own revolution. Saurfang could have started this early on, and he didn't. And I think that is a big, I think that's a big minus for him.
To me, it's just really, really bad storytelling. Because, like, if you look over everything that he's done in the past, like, they almost ruined his story a little bit in my eyes. Like, he's always been such a strong, virtuous leader, willing to stand up against, like, basically any great evil that Azeroth and all of its people have to face. And then now, as soon as something happens that he disagrees with, he just lays over and dies. Like, that just doesn't seem like Saurfang's previous character. Oh, I get that. It's a figure of speech. Like,
yeah, he is just kind of rolling over on this. It does seem weird, but at the same time, there's a really big gap that we have. The only thing that we have is what little we saw at the very beginning of the Battle for Azeroth intro scenario, and nothing since. So there's a lot of stuff that we're missing. We have no idea what kinds of adventures Saurfang is having, what he might be doing behind Sylvanas' back, because right now he has the freedom of not having Sylvanas watch him, assuming that Sylvanas doesn't have a bead on him. So it does give him that sort of opportunity. It's just that, in my opinion, given his position as the de facto orc racial leader, he could have done something. He could have done something at multiple times, multiple avenues.
There are, especially with the way that he handled the situation with Malfurion, I feel like he might have kind of he kind of disdained himself. Like, when he saw what he did, the way that he jumped into a one-on-one duel when he had no right or reason to do so. I don't know. Maybe he saw himself as losing his morals, saw himself as kind of losing touch with what he believes, and that's why he backed away. But at the same time, that does leave the massive hole of, again, he just left all of his people there under her leadership and didn't even try to do anything about it. But I don't know. It almost seems like a depressed teenager who did something stupid, and now they're just sitting there sulking on themselves.
It just sucks because, I mean, there's no taking away from what Sylvanas is doing right now. What she's doing is demonstrably pretty bad stuff that she's doing. But at the same time, like, for Garrosh to walk away is to me, that's tantamount to telling her, you know what, do what you want. I don't want to be a part of it. But do what you want, because I'm not gonna stop you. And I think if I was like a regular orc citizen, I'd be like, fuck this guy. He just walked away from everything. He walked away from being a soldier of the Horde, and that's where the whole treason talk and all that stuff, where all that plays in. And it's hard to fight that. There is a certain righteousness when it comes to, hey, I refuse to deal with this any longer. I'm not going to put up with it. But all that he's done before that was to say, hey, Sylvanas, this is wrong. Grrr. That's not enough. That is hardly sufficient to pull up that, oh, this is the last straw. I've been grrring so much, and you haven't listened to me grrr enough. Like, he hasn't been openly defiant, and he could have been.
Exactly. Like, his lack of even an attempt to push out what she's doing, it bothers me so much to his character type. I mean, it's almost the same way that Thrall just stepped away to go do his thing with the Earthen Ring and kind of ignored what was happening with Garrosh until it came time for his trial. Like, until it came time for the rebellion, he just kind of let it happen. He just was like, okay, so you're leader now. I'm going to walk away, do your thing,
I know
be
that
an orc.
And the thing is, like, Saurfang, he at least throughout the War of Thorns event, he like has his foot in the door. He's halfway there. Like, he's like, okay, he's still leading Horde troops. He still raises a city. That's war that happens. But then he wants to save the more helpless citizens on the second part. He axes Malfurion, but doesn't finish him off. Lets him go. It's like his kind of defiance of Sylvanas is, oh, I'm going to do things behind her back. I'm not going to defy her in front of her face. I'm just going to, you wanted me to kill him? He like hit me and knocked me out, and they got away. Oh no. To me, that's it's kind of a bitch move on his part.
Oh, I agree with you entirely on that. I mean, I even thought, especially with how honor-centric the dude is, I thought that it was completely against his character the way he jumped in on Malfurion like that. I mean, finished him off or not, like to me, that showed, I don't even know how I can really put it, but that just seems very, very out of character for an orcish racial leader to interrupt and cheap shot, like when Malfurion wasn't expecting, to interrupt and then cheap shot into the middle of a one battle.
Well, I don't buy into that's something that I think is a bit, to me, that's kind of a bit of a stretch. It's not like they're in a tournament. It's not like they're at the Argent tournament grounds and it's like, oh, Faceby and Makara, and like no one's around there. Like, there were tons of dead Horde soldiers around them too, and busted up stuff. It was not a one-on-one from the start. There were Horde bodies like all over the place. I don't know if I pointed that out or if you're able to, or if people were able to see that. I mean, hopefully that's still there when we start playing through stuff. But it's a battlefield scenario. It's chaos. There's crap flying all over the place. So to me, Saurfang saving Sylvanas was just that. Saurfang saving Sylvanas. Like,
Saurfang's loyalty showing.
Yeah. Whether it's to his war chief or just to the situation at hand, it's like, if they lose Sylvanas, they're going to get routed, and a bunch of other people are going to die. He needs to make a call. The thing is, though, he made different calls. It's like, okay, I'm gonna end the fight by throwing my axe at Malfurion's dome. Okay, cool, I got him, but I'm not gonna finish him off. I'm gonna let this war go on. I'm gonna let more people die and more tragedy happen, because I'm not going to succeed with Sylvanas' plan. Because as far as we know so far, because we haven't played through it yet, Sylvanas made pretty clear what to Saurfang what they're going to do. He was waiting at the Barrens to do the whole diversion tactic and go north instead of south to Ashenvale. So he knows everything that was going on, and he went along with the plan. But then when it came down to the final execution of it, he didn't follow through because the method of doing it was not honorable. I don't know. He was still willing to go with the plan of, hey, let's cut the head off the snake and cripple the cripple any alliance retaliation by going through with this method. But when it came down to it, he chickened out.
He entirely chickened out.
Okay. Actually, let me take that back. I won't say he entirely chickened out because the circumstances were against his sense of honor and all that, but he knew what the end game was, and it's that he wanted to walk away from, and that doesn't seem okay to me.
I feel like he should have either rebut her in the first place before the entire assault, or he should have just followed through with the plan and finished it.
I agree. The whole politics of playing that, in, and part of the politics there is, one, you want to be able to say what you want to say, but two, you need to stay in power as well. And he didn't really do either. He just kind of like let things go until she wasn't looking, and then he kind of did things his own way without saying anything. And then now he's going to end up lying to his war chief about what had happened, assuming that he lies. He might just straight up tell her what happened. But we don't know that. We don't know if there's going to be any sort of RP or dialogue that happens between the events in Darkshore as well and the start of the expansion.
Well, I mean, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what happens and ends up playing out at the end of it.
Yes, sir. So I think with that, I think we can start wrapping things up.
Yes, sir. I think I agree with you.
So today was pretty fun. We were able to talk about like the void and the light and the balance and all that stuff. We got to smack talk a little bit on everybody, on a little bit of Horde and a little bit of Alliance and all that stuff. So this was another fun one, John.
Well, I always enjoy coming on stream with you, so I'll always have a fantastic and very engaging conversation with you, man. It's always a blast.
We'll see if
Thanks so much for having me, man.